Hello, everybody. I think let's start the session. Very nice to welcome everybody here today to our event, Product Owners, Managers, dive into A/B testing, the best practices. Really excited to welcome everybody here. Seems we've got a good global audience from lots of different locations, Asia, Europe, and the Southern Hemisphere. Hopefully many more will join us and listen to our event that we're hosting today. The idea of this event is to provide value and support to the tech product community with a particular focus on A/B testing. We wanted to bring people together like so many are doing across the world during the virus, add value and to keep learning together, which is what the technology community is great at doing, and focus on the product niche. I wanted to say you're in great company. Product is rated as the number 4 on the list of the best jobs for 2020, according to Deloitte. Global M is planning to host 3 other events: Data Fireside Chat on the 23rd of April, a CTO C-suite event, an intrapreneur and entrepreneur event. Both of those to be confirmed, and I'll send the details shortly. This event will last an hour to an hour and 10 long, so it'll be nice and concise, and there'll be plenty of time to ask some questions as well. We'll be using the Slido tool. We'll add the Slido link. I think I've already put it on the chat bar for you too. And we'll add the number for you guys to log in and also to post your questions. I've added some already, so please do use the thumb icon to vote for your favorite question, and we'll ask those to Alfonso during his talk. Of course, if you want to send questions directly to me, please do, and I'm happy to ask them, or we can answer them following the event. Who am I? I'm the CEO and founder of Global M. We're a tech talent acquisition consultancy. We work globally to support startups, scale-ups, and corporates with high-growth hiring. We use data to dispel the myths and fill in the grey areas of recruitment, and we have offices in London, Johannesburg, and Barcelona. We have 130 technology clients that we work with over 19 countries and 4 continents. And look, I appreciate that some people on this talk might be looking for a new role or potentially want some career advice. And if you do, I'm happy, or a member of my team would be very happy to speak to you offline should you need us. Why A/B testing? I'll let Alfonso go into more details, but it's pretty clear from my standpoint, working with firms and candidates, PMs seem to really value the hard skills such as artificial intelligence and data, and soft skills like leadership and communication in equal measure. A/B testing really gives us the opportunity to focus on that hard skills element. Furthermore, 63% of product owners, according to Product School, want to work on products for people rather than for businesses, which makes A/B testing such an important topic to learn and hopefully master. As you can see, we're recording this event, so hopefully everybody is happy with that. So we'll leave it on record, and this will be online for others to share and to access throughout the next week or next month. Please also do just switch off your video if you can do, and this will allow Alfonso, who's sharing slides, to make it work as smoothly as possible. So over to Alfonso. He needs little introduction. He's lived in no more than 12 countries. So you can say he's well-traveled. We met when he was passing by London, and I'm privileged to call him a friend and a source of learning and inspiration. Alfonso has an MSc in computer science and an MBA from London Business School. After a long career in telecommunications across Europe, he moved to Asia, started a new career in product management, quickly rising through major Southeast Asian multinationals, and now heads all packaged products at AirAsia, the largest Asian airline outside of China. Thank you very much, everybody, and over to Alfonso.
Thank you, Nick. Thanks so much for the kind introduction, and welcome, everybody. And thank you for spending either your lunch, or if you're in Europe, or your dinner if you're in Asia with me. So I really appreciate it. And hopefully this is a nice way to spend an hour and learn something new. Nick, can you hear me all right?
Yeah, I hear you perfect.
Perfect. Awesome. Okay, so let's get started. So we're going to talk about A/B testing, and we're going to really go in deep. And ideally, at the end of the talk, you will learn 10 golden rules about A/B testing, which are not that obvious. So about AirAsia, AirAsia is the biggest, as Nick was saying, the biggest airline in Asia outside of China. We fly to 25 countries and over 150 destinations. We fly all the way to Honolulu in the US, and we really, really hope to be back in the sky soon. As Nick was saying, you know, this is kind of my dream, being able to work for an airline. So I was very, very happy to join. Now it's a little bit less happy time, but hopefully we're going to be back in the skies soon. So let's start with a couple of minutes, kind of not exactly focusing on A/B testing, but I just want to give you a sense of why this is important and why understanding A/B testing a little bit deeper is important. Because statistics can really be counterintuitive. I'm not so sure if you ever heard of it, but the Montiel problem is basically this idea that you have 3 doors. Behind one door, there is a car. Behind the other 2 doors, there are goats. And basically, you just have to pick the door of your choice. And then after you pick your door, basically, the host knows exactly what happens behind every door. So you have only 3 options, right? You can choose either one goat, or the car, or the other goat. And the question is, if the host opens a door, he will always have a chance to show a goat, right? Both in A, in B, and in C. So what happens if the host offers you to switch? He's gonna tell you like, hey, I showed you this goat, and now I'm gonna let you swap the door you selected with the remaining door. Now, most people, including me, when I first heard about this problem, thought that, hey, it's 50-50, right? Now there are only 2 doors open, so it doesn't matter. Well, statistics will tell you that actually that's not the case. If you swap the door that you selected with the remaining 3rd door, you actually have 66 chances of winning versus only 33% chances of winning with the door that you selected. And hopefully this kind of gives you, unless you knew this test before, it's very likely that you are a bit surprised by this result. And hopefully this will give you the sense that, hey, actually statistic is a little bit counterintuitive. And so there is a little bit to learn about A/B testing, even though maybe you're using this tool every single day. So what's really an A/B test? Basically, it's like a race, right? It's like a drag race. And you see that this is the theme a little bit of the presentation. So basically, if you want to go with statistical language, A/B testing is really the art of rejecting the null hypothesis. So there is this thing called a false positive. And basically, this is, there are 2 types of mistakes that can be done in A/B testing. One is called the type 1 error or false positive. And basically, this is an example when A and B in reality are really identical, but actually our observation show us that they are different. And the opposite is the type 2 error or false negative, which is the case in which in reality A and B are different, but after our observation, we claim that they are identical. So the important takeaway here is that A/B testing is a measure of reality, but it's not reality itself. So what we are saying here in A/B testing is that we cannot know the truth. We can only make statistical deductions based on observations. And this is really the key to understand a lot of what's coming next in the presentation, because you really have to understand that whatever is the statistic, the underlying truth, we have no way to really understand it. We have no way to really see the truth. All we can see is basically the manifestation of the truth, and that could be deceiving. That's why we have those false positive and false negatives. The other thing that you probably heard about when talking about A/B testing and statistical significance is the p-value. But what is exactly is the p-value? The p-value is basically a measure of the percentage of false positive that you are okay to deal with. So in other words, when we're saying that we want 95% significant results, what we're really saying is that we are okay if 5% of the results we think are positive and are in reality false positive. And again, this is quite important for the remainder of the thing we're going to talk about. So let's see this in practice. This is an online tool, and at the end we will have links to all these tools, and there are sources throughout the presentation. And basically, let's analyze a little bit what this tool is telling us, right? This tool tells us that, imagine that we have a website, and this website has a baseline conversion rate of 20%. What does that mean? It means that if 100 people land on our website, 20%, let's say, buy our product, if that's the conversion we are looking for, right? And now we're setting up an A/B test, and we're saying, actually, we would like to measure a minimum detectable effect of 5% absolute, right? So this means that we want to be able to detect if our variant, which is our B side, is less than 50%, the conversion is less than 50% or over 25%, which means that anything between 15 and 25, we wouldn't be able to catch it because it would fall below our minimum detectable effect. Now, the tool tells us that the sample size, the minimum sample size to measure what we just described is 1,000 user per variant. So imagine that we have 1,000 users per day, then we need 2 days in order to run this test and have statistical significance. But here at the bottom, you see that there are 2 more variables, and we are interested about the significance level, which is the 5%. So you see that if we leave this statistical significance to 5%, meaning 95% statistical significance, we need 1,000 users per variant. But actually, if we change only one variable, the statistical significance, and we bring it from 5% to 1%, now we see that the sample size grows from 1,000 to 1,500. So this is actually, in a nutshell, why we are okay to accept that number of false positive, because we want to run our experiment faster. And also because, in general, 99% of our products, we deal with e-commerce. So we are not that worried about some false positive, because we're not running medical tests or any other thing that can have a real, like a significant impact on lives or other things like that. So again, why not 99% significant? Because now let's do the same example, the same exercise, but with more realistic number, right? As you probably know, realistically, conversion rate of website is in the low single digits. So let's say 3%. And now imagine that we want to measure if our B variant has a relative impact of 5%, meaning that is either below 2.85 or above 3.15. Now you see how the sample size start to become quite important, right? So 200,000 visitors for certain website might be 1 day of traffic. For certain website can be a week of traffic or even more, depending on the size of your audience, right? So all of a sudden, imagine that it takes us 2 weeks to reach these 200,000 users, right? If we go from 95% to 99%, there we go. We go from 200,000 to 300,000. So obviously, this is the main reason why we are willing to accept less than 99% accuracy, or maybe 99.9, etc. Because we want to run many tests, and so we want to run a test that can end sooner rather than later. Do we have any questions so far, Nick? This is kind of the basics, so it's nice to have, if we have any question, to kind of ask and answer so that we are all on the same level.
No questions as of yet, so perhaps we can continue, I think.
Okay, feel free, guys, because this is really the most important part. And once we have this foundation right, everything else is going to be very smooth. So once we have all those foundation, now let's go back to our car race. An A/B test can be only in one of 4 states, right? So we have the state in which both cars are still running and we haven't reached our finish line yet. So the test is still running. Then we have a second state in which, of course, car number 1 wins, right? The test is completed and the A variant won, or vice versa. We have the case in which the test is completed and the B variant won, right? But then the most interesting and the least talked about status of an A/B test is actually this. Is actually the test where the 2 cars pass the line, and even though they're not exactly at the same level, right? they are still not far enough to be able to claim that they are statistically significantly different, right? So in this case, the test is completed, but A and B are not statistically significantly different. And again, keep in mind what we just said, right? This is our observation. It could actually be that A and B are statistically different, but in this particular observation, they are not. And I'm sure you're familiar with this, basically, right? With this way to measure, to show a certain value. The dot here tells us exactly where the car arrived, but the two line gives us the 95% confidence interval, which means that we are 95% confident that the true value of the place where the car arrived is between those 2 points, right? And now, since basically even the two dots are actually separated, the two elements overlap. There is an overlap between this line and this line. That's why we cannot say that they are statistically significantly different. And this interval is called the confidence interval. So a little bit of tongue in cheek here, but this is the confidence interval, right? So this is another way to look at the confidence interval. This is a cartoon from XKDC. And basically here, this girl wants to bring along the boyfriend, and the boyfriend says, well, actually, I'm not your boyfriend. I just casually date a number of people. And she showed to the boyfriend that actually this is the time she spends with everyone, and this is the time she spends with him. So obviously, you know, she's clearly an outlier in the time they spend together. So she says, face it, I'm your statistically significant other. This is another way to think about statistical significance. So now you've probably seen again this slide as well, this image as well. This is kind of the Gaussian distribution of the results of an A/B test, right? And here, imagine that we're plotting the difference between the conversion rate of B minus the conversion rate of A. So in case A and B are identical, they will be here, right? The statistical the difference between the two will be about 0. And here we're saying that basically, if in this area, right, there is basically a flat test, because in this area, A and B are either identical or not far enough to be able to distinguish between the two. Versus here, right, we say that A is statistically significantly smaller than B, and vice versa. Here we're saying that B is statistically significantly bigger than A. And if we want to use statistician vocabulary, we can say that in this case, we fail to reject the null hypothesis, right? Versus here we're saying that the null hypothesis is rejected because the test is statistically significant, okay? Now, this is one of another key element of the whole presentation, right? So here I'm plotting the p-value. There you go. That's why it starts at 0.05 and goes all the way to 0, right? And I'm plotting a few experiments, and here is the time, right? This is where I am, and I'm telling you, okay, I see here, right, that this experiment is statistically significant because the p-value is less than 0.05. Now, what can you tell me about this experiment? What's going to happen after this, right? If I keep running this experiment, what's going to happen? Basically, in this example, we know the truth because I did this myself, right? I emulated this basically using a Google Sheet, right? And I can tell you that in this case, the conversion rate of A was 80%, and the conversion rate of B was 86%. So there was a statistically significantly difference, and I can actually see it here, right? You can see the p-value goes all the way down. But again, the moment you see it, you're here, right? So you don't know exactly what's going to happen later. But now look at this other example. This is very interesting, right? Here you see that, again, this is another experiment. And again, you see that the p-value lands into the statistically significant territory, right? So what's in your opinion, the conversion rate of B? We know that the conversion rate of A is 80%, but what is B, right? It could be like this, right? It could be much bigger or much smaller. In this case, we would see that B stays, the p-value stays below 0.005. But in reality, here we are seeing that it goes a little bit up, it goes a little bit down. What would you say about this? Probably you would say that actually this is statistically significant, right? Because you can see that p-value goes below the 5% threshold and stays there for a long time, right? But in reality, I did this using a conversion rate for B identical to the conversion rate of A. So this is the perfect example of a false positive. So if I would have to call this experiment, I would say, actually, the experiment is statistically significant, but in reality, it is not, right? So with all this introduction, now we should have all the tools needed to go through these 10 golden rules for A/B testing. Rule number 1, have strong hypotheses, right? So in order for us to avoid as much as possible false positive and to know exactly what we're doing, we really want to base our hypothesis into observation. So we really want to either look at data or look at customer reviews or interviews and really understand that, based on the certain study, we believe that this condition for this particular user will encourage them to change their behavior. And then we want to have a clear understanding of how are we going to validate this, right? We will see this effect and we will impact those metrics. And then what is the objective? What is the underlying motivation? So this is the hypothesis template from booking.com, which is actually one of the companies, the internet companies in the world with the strongest background into A/B testing. And you will see that a lot of people that come from booking.com are very much familiar with this way to handle A/B testing. And basically the idea here is to avoid the let's change something and see what happens effect, right? You really want to go into an A/B test with a clear understanding of what it is that you want to test and why. So golden rule number 1, talk to customer, learn from data, and build strong hypotheses. Now, let's talk about AA testing. AA testing, probably many of you have heard about this before, is the idea of running an A/B test, but running with the same version of the software, both on A and on B. So again, this goes back to our false positive idea earlier on, right? If our tool was perfect, and if we knew that we could actually see the truth, a AA test would always result in a negative, in basically, the result would always be that A and B are identical, because they are identical. Underlining, we know that the truth is that they are identical. But because we are okay with 95% confidence, then reality is that we already know, as we did in the foundation part of this webinar, that 5% of the time, in fact, actually, we will see that that A and B are different when they are really not. Okay? So, and here I want to share this quote, which I think is very interesting. A false sense of security is worse than no security at all. And the idea here is what? The idea here is that you really want to test the tool you use for A/B testing and test what happens if you run 1, 2, 5, 10, 20 AA tests. In fact, if you ask companies such as booking.com, they actually run every single day hundreds or thousands of AA tests because they want to be able to be confident in their tool every single day. So golden rule number 2, test your tool before you trust it. You really want to be sure that you understand exactly how your tool works and how does this false positive and false negative happen in your tool in order to be able to trust it going forward. So let's talk about, again, the 95% confidence. We already talked about it quite a lot, right? And by now, we know exactly what that means. We know that it means that 5 times out of 100 or 1 time in 20, we will get a false positive as a result. So here there is another cartoon from XKCD. And here it says, somebody reads on the news that, hey, jelly bean can cause acne. And then they do an experiment and they say, well, we actually found no link between jelly beans and acne because the p-value is bigger than 0.005. Well, that settles it. No, wait a second. I heard that actually is a certain color that causes acne. So again, they go and test. Now, what happens when you test colors? If you don't have a strong hypothesis, if you test colors without a strong hypothesis, well, obviously we know that there are more than 20 colors, right? So you probably should already know where this is going. So they test 5 colors, and they're all negative. Then they test 5 more colors, and they're all negative. Then again, they test 5 more color, and they're all negative. But lo and behold, they test 5 more color, and boom, they found the link between green jelly beans and acne. So what's the result? Obviously, news. Green jelly beans linked to acne, 95% confidence. So what does this mean here? It means that most likely your tool will be able to break your data among a ton of different axes. They will tell you what is the result for your A/B test in mobile web, desktop, app, iOS, Android, by country, by profile of your users. Be very careful, because if only one of those groups will tell you that, hey, I found statistical significance, what you're looking at is that 1 in 20 tests that is a false positive. So when you start breaking down your data, be careful about what you read into that data. So golden rule 3, be very careful when you segment your results. Do you have any questions so far?
No questions as of yet, but we could ask one that we prepared, Alfonso.
Yes.
So yeah, one we prepared, which might be interesting for everybody, is how does A/B testing differ across the firms you've worked for?
Right. So absolutely. So this is something that we discussed when we were preparing this with Nick, right? And I really want to emphasize that the reason why I'm passionate about this is that this is by no means the same knowledge shared across all countries, across all companies. There are certain companies such as Booking.com and all the companies that are part of Booking Holdings, that they have a very, very strong culture of A/B testing. And maybe those information are a little bit more spread. But then there are other companies where there is not the same view of A/B testing for many reasons, right? If you work in a small company, you simply don't have enough users and don't have enough data to afford to run tens or hundreds of A/B tests. But if you work in a big enough company, hopefully the information we're sharing could be useful for you to dig a little bit deeper and start to get the best out of your A/B testing engine. So now we're getting into something which I believe is a little bit more challenging. So I invite you, if you're interested, to ask questions and be sure that we really go through this part, understanding it exactly, right? So now what I've done, right, because I was so interested about this and I was a bit fascinated and I wanted to understand a little bit more, I asked myself, okay, I have Excel, I can test a few thousand cases. What conversion can I test with 2,000 data points? So I play with the tool the other way around, right? I actually created a baseline conversion and a minimum detectable effect such that I would actually get to about 1,000 sample size, right? So I got that if I have a baseline conversion of 80% and I want to detect a 5% absolute difference, so between 75 and 85, actually I would actually need only 1,000 sample, right, per variant. So what did I do? I actually created my own very little AA testing engine. So I created this Google spreadsheet, right? And now you see that each column, each pair is an AA test. So this would be one run of my website, and B would be the second run of my website. And the green together would be test number 1. Then the white together would be test number 2. Then the green would be test number 3, all the way to 20. And if you paid attention so far, you know exactly why 20, right? Because now these are 20 AA tests. And if we are actually testing them with 95% confidence, we know that actually one of them will be a false positive, right? So now, again, we are looking at the same graph, right? We're plotting p-value, and the x-axis is actually time, right? And the y-axis is p-value, right? So if you look at this graph, right, you see how the p-value changes over time. At the beginning, many experiments have a p-value which is below 5%, and then kind of the situation stabilizes, and then you see that there is only this one experiment, right? But again, try to keep in mind that we built this to be an AA test, and all 20 of that here, if you see on the right, we go from experiment 1 to experiment 20. All of them are AA tests. So the truth is that none of them should show a p-value below 5%. But in reality, we see that there is actually one, which is our famous false positive, which show a value of p below 5%. But what is the learning point here? If you look on the left, basically this is the idea of peaking. You probably heard about it if you read a little bit about A/B testing. And the idea of peaking is that you want to see the result of the A/B test before you're actually waiting for the right time, right? Basically, you're trying to open the oven before the cake is baked. And I'm sure you know from experience, and that's why your mom was so upset, that you're not supposed to open the oven when the cake is still baking, right? So here what you see is that if you're actually looking into your experiment too soon, you will have a lot of A/B tests which are considered valid because the p-value is below 5%, but in reality they are not, right? So golden rule number 4, if you check your experiment too early, you're just looking at noise, okay? And now for the one that is the most interesting aspect for me, and the one that I really had to study hard to understand and is very much counterintuitive, probably worse than the Montiel example at the very beginning, right? So now we are seeing another run of the same Excel file, right? So we have our 20 experiment. Now we look on the left and we see that at the beginning of a bunch of experiment turned to be statistically significant, but actually after a while we see what we expect, right? In this part of the graph, we see that no experiment is statistically significant, which is the truth, because we know the truth, and we know that those 20 experiments are actually all non-statistically significant, right? Because they are AA experiments. But then what happened after we reach the 1,000 conversion? We see that one experiment becomes statistically significant, and then it goes back up. And then another experiment becomes statistically significant, and it goes back up. And then a third one actually becomes statistically significant and goes back up. So I'm going to spend a few minutes here, and I hope that if you have any question, you'll be okay to ask them, because this is actually the key, to me, the key and the less well-known fact about A/B testing from my personal experience. The idea here is that based on the theory that we just discussed, we are okay and we are ready to accept one false positive. But hey, wait a second. Here we are seeing 3 false positives. So something is wrong. The math has to be wrong. Science has to be wrong. Statistics have to be wrong. Well, obviously, you know that this is not the case, right? So you understand that there is something else at play. So what's going on here? Why we see 3 experiments that are all 3 statistically significant? Well, actually, the giveaway is that this is only statistically significant in this period of time, and this only here, and this only here. So what actually happens is that the truth is that we only get 95% confidence if we set in advance the time at which we're going to look at the experiment. So in other words, if we say, imagine that our website gets 500 visitors per week. So we say, hey, our A/B test is going to run for 2 weeks. And after 2 weeks, we're going to open the oven and we're going to look at the cake. But not only you're not allowed to look at the oven and open the oven before 2 weeks, but also you're not allowed to open the oven after 2 weeks. And this is really important, because a lot of time people will be like, hey, my experiment is flat. Let me wait another day. Let me wait another week. What you do when you wait another week is actually you increase enormously the chances of having a false positive. So you cannot claim anymore that your experiments are with 95% confidence. Let me say this once again, because this is really the most important takeaway for me from this presentation. Unless you decide in advance, based on the results of this tool, right? Based on the number that this tool tell you. This tool tell you you need 1,000 visitors per variant in order to call this experiment. Unless you trust this tool and you call the experiment after 1,000, what happened? What happened is that all of them have, in this case, right, if we would stop the experiment here, we would see that only 1 in 20 was statistically significant, which is our one false positive in 20, which we are allowed. But if you then wait and you keep the, let's say, experiment 9, right? You say, well, it's flat. Let me wait a little bit more. And then you call it when he's here. Then you're going to call 2 false positive. And then you have experiment 14, and you're like, well, it's flat. Let's wait a little bit more. And then you're going to call another one. And if I would let this experiment run and run and run, I would actually have all of this 20 experiment to become statistically significant. So Nick, do we have any questions?
Yeah, we do indeed, Alfonso, and some really good ones. One which I think is particularly relevant: how often should an A/B test be rerun after conclusion? Should there be validations on whether the conclusion is sustainable over time?
Yes.
And the second one, what would you recommend for startups that do not have enough data to run A/B testing?
Perfect. So let me take the second question, and actually question number 1 is actually the golden rule number 10. So we'll take that then. So question number 2, for startups that don't have enough data, unfortunately, the harsh truth is that A/B testing is kind of a luxury item that you're not still able to afford. Meaning what? Meaning that if you have little information and not enough data, and you're still at the beginning of your journey, you are supposed to have low-hanging fruits that would actually come from talking to customer, and you will have basically things that you can improve dramatically, because your funnel is really not yet well optimized. And as you saw now, and I'm very glad that you asked this question, because it means that you understand the mathematics behind it, right? If you don't have enough data point, basically you will never have statistical significance in your A/B tests. So the idea is work on the fundamental, work on your funnel, understand your customer needs, and then leave A/B testing for the time where you have enough traffic to actually make it relevant and statistical significant. I hope that answered the question. And if you have further question, please let me know. So now that we passed through this, which is, in my opinion, the hardest, but also the most fascinating and rewarding aspect of A/B testing, we go to the golden rule number 5. Accept flat tests. They are part of the game. If your organization and yourself, if you're rewarded based on the results of your A/B tests and based on how many tests you win, well, guess what? You're going to have a lot of wins, but that doesn't mean that your wins are true. If your organization counts the number of wins and counts how much each win increments your traffic, trust me, because I've been there, you will see that at the end of the year, your business should have doubled. But hey, what a second, my business only grew 10%. Well, here is your answer. All those A/B tests that you thought were positive were actually false positive. Okay? So I really, really hope that this strikes home, and please ask any question if you want before we move on. So Nick, is there any further question?
Yeah, one more question on your baking analogy. Is the consideration duration or sample size for the baking cake analogy, can you stretch out your time to get your N up?
Pardon me?
N up?
Oh yeah, so basically, so the only rule is this. The only rule is that if you decide, if you set your time, all the experiment have to follow that time. You cannot be flexible with the truth and saying, okay, this test is going to run for 2 weeks, but the other test is going to run for 4, and the other one is going to run for 3. It doesn't matter if you go for 2, for 3, for 4. Look at this graph, right? It doesn't matter if I call time here, if I call time here, or if I call time here. In all cases, I will only call one false positive. What the only problem is if I call this one statistically significant here, this one statistically significant here, and this one here. If each cake is allowed its own time in the oven, that's when the problem lies. But if you open the oven for all experiment after the right amount of time, the same amount of time, then you're good. I hope that answers the question. All right, so this was the hardest part. After this is smooth sailing. So if you have any further question, please put them in the chat or in the Slido, and Nick will let us know. Now, okay, so we'll run through questions, right? So having said that, and here is actually where I really wished that we had the chance to ask you questions. So if you don't mind, can I ask you on the chat to try to put some of your answers? What do you think is the percentage of success which is commonly reported by Bing, by Google, and by this, which is a startup tool for A/B testing, Visual Website Optimizer? Can you please on the chat try to answer and tell me what do you think is the percentage of successful tests that each of these organizations report? Anyone? Okay, 5%. Okay. Anything else? Give me a couple more. Okay, 33%, 5 to 10%, 1%. All right. Couple more. Okay, so maybe I've done too good of a job because you're all hovering around the 5 to 10%, and we have a 33%. But I should have probably started this with I started with this question. Maybe it would have been a little bit more fun, but this is actually the result, right? So those organizations, including Google, report around 10 to 20% success rate, meaning out of 10 tests run, only one is a statistical significant success, right? So golden rule number 6, majority of A/B tests fail. If you work for an organization where 50%, 60%, 80% of A/B tests are successful, maybe you have to ask yourself some hard questions. Now, Texas sharpshooter. I don't know if you ever heard about it. The Texas sharpshooter is a guy that first shoots and then puts circles around the bullets, around the bullet holes, right? So that's why he's always gonna hit the bullseye, because he's actually painting the bullseye after shooting, okay? So golden rule number 7, set your KPIs in advance. So that's why in the golden rule number 1, we talk about hypothesis, right? We really have to decide our hypothesis first and then allow the test to validate it. Because otherwise we go again back in the same problem, back in the same pitfall. If your A/B test engine or tool allows for tens and tens of KPI to measure, for sure, by sheer statistical luck, you will get a few which move statistically significant, but only if you set them in advance. So if your hypothesis was strong and what happened during your test matches your hypothesis, then you can really say, I was right and my hypothesis is proven. Then multiple experiments in parallel. Now here we go a little bit outside of the realm of my mathematical and statistical depth SME, subject matter expertise, but I still wanna share this with you because I find it very, very, very important. Here, basically, we see a graph from Bing, right? And you can see how in the first, in the year between 2000 and 2010, 11, basically they were only running maybe up to 100 experiments per week, more or less, right? But then here, basically, they start to enhance the platform to allow multiple parallel experiments. And here you can see how the trajectory of experiments really took off. And here, basically, the idea is that this is a kind of, again, as I said, a little bit behind my statistical knowledge. But basically, once you start running experiments in parallel, you start getting into problems such as interference between experiments, right? And there are statistical ways to look at that interference and work around it. But the goal, the most important thing here is that if you work in an e-commerce company and if your goal is business and you don't deal with patients, with lives, with you know, airport or any particularly sensitive area, at the end of the day, the advantage that you will get by running multiple parallel tests, it's so high that a little bit of interference will not cause any problem, because again, we are talking about maybe extra false positives, but here the goal is to go, you see, to double or maybe even increase the number of experiments way, way more. So if you think about platforms such as Booking Holdings, they actually publicly mention that at booking.com, they run thousands and tens of thousands of experiments per year. So we really want to run several hundreds experiments concurrently per day. So if you think about the maturity of an experimentation platform in a company, we are really talking several hundred concurrent experiments each week. So golden rule number 8, try the best you can to get your platform to allow you to test multiple experiments in parallel. And here, I guess I'm talking mostly with people, with folks coming from a large company where the A/B testing engine is built in-house. In my experience, sometimes statisticians are actually guiding those efforts. And so they kind of stop this opportunity to run multiple tests due to interference. Here I'm telling you, look at the data out there, look at experiences which are publicly available, such as this from Bing, and you will see that the vast majority of people agree that interference is not a good reason not to run multiple concurrent tests, mainly because time is money. And if you stop from running multiple experiments, you will actually limit your opportunity to learn a lot. So if we think about, if we take a step back, right, and we look at the value of A/B testing, what is it that A/B testing allows you to do? A/B testing allows you to measure impact independently of external factors, because again, every other factor is equal, right? The day of the week is equal. The time of the day is equal. Your location is equal. Simply, you randomize the people on A and B with all equal components. There are still companies that don't have A/B testing engine, and they believe that running something maybe one day yes and one day no, or 1 week yes and 1 week no, kind of yields more or less the same results. But in reality, there is a lot of research that shows that even things like weather change the pattern. Because of course, if it's not a sunny day, there will be more people home, stuck in front of their computer. So there might be that some external factor are actually having an impact on the results of your A/B test. So A/B testing is really the only way that allows you to only measure the results of the difference in your software. They allow you to avoid human errors, because imagine that you have a piece of code and you actually want to, and it's a bug fix, and you actually want to deploy it. Well, even if it's a bug fix, you really don't have 100% certainty that it solves every problem. Often a bug fix actually introduces new problem. So with A/B testing, you can actually make sure that the end result to your bottom line is the one that you expect, meaning that the B variant will actually increase your transactions. And even more interesting, A/B testing allows you to be bold and really try something that nobody agrees with. And this is a quote from Jeff Bezos from Amazon. If you decide that you're going to do only the things you know that they're going to work, you're going to leave a lot of opportunity on the table. And here, I want to share something which I find very fascinating. It's a kind of a history lesson about A/B testing, right? So I think everybody knows what this is. This is, at the bottom of every Amazon page, customer who bought this item also bought, and then they show us a bunch of items, right? By far, we are a little bit jaded about this. We see it in every e-commerce website. We really don't think it works because it doesn't work for us because we're not very much affected by marketing. But of course, none of this is true, right? And the story behind this product is actually quite fascinating. You can find it in the blog, and I put the source in this page. But basically here, the engineer that developed it said that, there was a marketing senior vice president that was dead set against it. And they really didn't want, and this vice president really didn't want this idea to go through. So the engineer was forbidden to work on this idea any further, but he decided to prepare the feature for an online test anyway. And luckily, the culture at Amazon was such that even a top executive was really, it was hard to play to actually stop an A/B test. So the A/B test ran anyway, and not only did it win, but the feature won by such a wide margin that not having it was actually costing Amazon a lot of money. So this is the power of A/B testing, okay? If you allow A/B testing for everything for which you have a strong hypothesis, you will really be able to find things that you would have not found if you were very conservative. And that's the reason why Booking, Amazon, Google, Bing, they really run hundreds and thousands of A/B tests every year. Just because it really gives you the power, like we said, to be bold and test ideas, even though not everyone agrees with, right? As long as there is someone that has a strong hypothesis based on data and customer observation, then you should be able to test it. And in fact, if you look at what Booking.com says publicly, and in fact is the same thing with the Airbnb, they are really trying to enable as many users as possible to be able to run, employees. They really try to enable as many employees as possible, not only developers, not only product managers, but everyone, designer, data scientists, to really run their own A/B tests, because it's a very simple calculation. The more A/B tests they run, the more the website performance will improve. So golden rule number 9, test everything you deploy, yes, including bug fixes. The moment you have enough traffic, as we said earlier with the previous question, as long as you have enough traffic, you really want to test everything you deploy. And then this is actually the answer to the previous question, for how long does the result of an A/B test last? So basically here you see a few screenshots that I took from public data. On the left, you see basically the difference, the percentage mix between desktop and mobile. And you see that basically worldwide, desktop was dominant up until 2009, 2010. And now this is data already old, 2016. And you can see that it's 50-50. So by now, I'm sure that mobile is probably at 70, 80%, right? So device mix changes every time, over time. Then on the right, you see download speeds, right? Every year we hear 3G, 4G, 5G. So if you think about how big should your pages be, how big your images should be, because of course it's a trade-off, right? If your image is bigger, it's going to give more information to the customer. So maybe the customer is more likely to buy, but obviously it's going to make the page slower. So the slowness of the page will actually inhibit buying, right? But here you see how the download speed keeps changing and user profile changes. This is the smartphone penetration in Indonesia. And you can see how even today, it's still not that high compared to maybe more advanced countries like Europe or Singapore or United States, right? So you can see that basically the golden rule number 10 is that test results are short-lived. So you shouldn't worry about the test that is more than 6 months old. If you have strong hypotheses and if you have data or customer insights that gives you reason to test an hypothesis, go ahead and test it, because most likely conditions around you have changed and very likely the results of your A/B test will be different. So, Nick, do we have any more questions?
Yeah, we do. Thanks, Alfonso. Really, really great talk. There is a really topical one that we have, which perhaps we can go to first. In the current situation where due to COVID, there is change in user behavior, what should be the processes for conducting A/B testing? Then there's another one, which is A/B testing mandatory for every feature release? And the third one, but aren't longer tests problematic because there is more seasonal variability?
Okay, awesome. Thank you for the question. Those are all really good questions. I would say that the current situation of COVID, right? I'll be honest with you. This is a great question, and I haven't really thought about it. But my honest feedback is, depending what you want to achieve, right? If what you're trying to achieve is a variation of your website that actually handles the particular situation, right? And I'll give you a very honest example, right? If you look at airasia.com right now, you can see that this is not the standard website that we normally show, because we know that right now less people are buying flights. Or if you live in Southeast Asia and you open Grab, which is the equivalent of Uber for everyone who doesn't live in Southeast Asia, you will see that normally their first offer is transport, right? Transport car ride like Uber, right? But now they change, and their first icon is actually food, because right now food delivery is by far the most interesting offer for them, right? So I guess if you want to find answers for this period, then A/B testing works exactly the same as it's always had. But of course, you should keep in mind that results that are valid today won't be valid as soon as the situation changes again. So I guess you could say that COVID-19 creates like an extreme effect of everything changes just in these windows of time. I'm sorry, Nick, I forgot the other two questions.
Yeah, no problem at all. We've got another question as well, which we can potentially bring in
Let's
too.
go one at a time, so maybe I can remember the one that you asked.
Yeah, no worries. I'll slow it down. So the second one is A/B testing mandatory for every feature release?
All right, so that's a good question, and I'll give you my answer, and I'll give you my colleague answer. So I have a great colleague at AirAsia, and we actually once had this conversation, and my argument is every single thing that goes live should be tested, because, you know, if nothing else, I'll give you one single reason: human error. If nothing else, if you're not convinced about external factor, if you're not convinced about, you know, ability to double check things, at least believe me when it comes to human error. Unless you believe that your developers are infallible, then please test everything you deploy. But I'll also give you the opposite view, and this is the view of great colleagues which I highly respect at AirAsia, and they tell me that, hey, no, come on, there are certain things you don't have to test, that the sun rises in the east, right? You don't have to test that, I don't know, a shorter funnel, for example, creates more engagement. Well, you're right, but I'll test it anyway. That's my philosophy, but I might by no means, you know, the know about this. Based on my experience and based on what I saw, in my career, I would test it unless there are stringent reasons that maybe, you know, we don't have enough availability of slots for testing because our tool maybe is not so mature. And so basically we are still stuck in a situation where we only can run a limited amount of concurrent testing. So that would be the only reason in which I would make an exception if we cannot test it at all. But if I don't have a limitation in my tool, I would definitely test everything.
Brilliant. And the third question, aren't longer tests problematic because there is more seasonal variability?
So I think in a sense, if I correctly understand the question, I would actually go back to the same answer for startup, right? So you're right. If your test, if in order to achieve statistically significant results, you actually run for more than, let's say, a month, then yes. But then the answer would be that probably you're not, your company, your startup, your organization is not yet at the level of, at the size required to really start A/B testing at scale. So in that case, probably you are still in the phase that you have really low-hanging fruits, and you really have to rather listen to your customers and understanding what they need rather than try to A/B test new feature, because you still are small enough that you can talk to your customer, you can listen to them more easily. In that case, yes, that's a case in which I think A/B testing is not advisable, but only because you want to run your test in, let's say, normally 2 weeks, maximum 4 weeks. That should be enough for you to get your results. If that's not the case, then maybe you are not yet at that phase of your growth.
Brilliant. Thank you, Alfonso.
Question?
Yeah, that's everything, but we can leave the Slido open. So if anybody wants to ask any further questions after the event, once you've absorbed the information, let us know, and happy to keep that open for everybody.
Cool, fantastic. So there you have it. Those are the 10 golden rules of A/B testing. I'm really grateful that you guys stick around for an hour. I hope it wasn't boring and that you learned something that you didn't know before. And also, there is a type form that Nick is gonna put in the chat now, if he hasn't done it already. And basically, we would really like to get your feedback. And if you leave your email, you get a chance to win a £10 Amazon gift card. And also, we would like to inform you that if this is interesting for you, let us know with the type form, because we are really planning an in-depth webinar, which is more of an introduction on all things product management, not just A/B testing. A/B testing is a very small part of that seminar. And obviously, if there is enough interest, we will run that. It's basically 8 hours. We can run it in 2 sessions of 4 hours. We could run it over the week, over the weekend. I mean, let's try to get to use a little bit this time where we are stuck at home to learn something new.
Brilliant stuff. Thank you, Alfonso, and thank you so much for an engaging talk, and everybody for joining us during their lunch hour, or if it's dinner time, your dinner time. So we'll be in touch, and yeah, look forward to getting your Typeform surveys.
Yes, so please, if you have any more question, put it in the Slido or in the chat, and please leave us a feedback to give us a sense of, you know, was this useful? Was this fast, slow, interesting, uninteresting? And your interest in going a little bit deeper with an introduction to product management.
Brilliant. Thank you, everybody. Stay safe, and yeah, appreciate you joining us, and hopefully see you at the next sessions.
Cool. All right. So if there is no further question, then maybe we can close it. Anything else, guys? All right. Very good. All right. Thanks so much, Nick. Thank you, everybody. And I'm signing off. And if there is anything, maybe through the Typeform, we can still get in touch.
Brilliant. Speak soon, everybody. Thanks, Alfonso.
Thanks, Nick. Bye.
Bye.